Good morning, dear students. In this class, we are going to take a look at the novel The History of Bees by Maya Lunde. Even though the first part of her name is spelled as Maja, you have to pronounce it as Maya. Okay. So, we have got here this beautiful novel by Maya Lunde. Before we come to the novel, we can take a look at the author. As I have mentioned, Maya Lunde is a Norwegian writer. She is a writer of climate fiction. You might have heard of climate fiction. Climate fiction are a genre of novels which deals with climate change. So the core idea of the novel will be something that is related to climate change or what consequences climate change has brought about. So as the title indicates, we can see that this novel has got something to do with bees. But again, before we come to the context or the background of the novel, we shall look at the author. As I just mentioned, she is a Norwegian writer, and here you can see the picture of Maya Lunde. Okay, so this is Maya Lunde, a young writer from Norway. She came to limelight with the publication of her first novel, which was titled as Across the Border. This was published in 2012, which, as you can see on the screen, is a novel written for children. Now, this was followed by the publication of The History of Bees in 2015, and she became famous with the publication of this book, and it won the Norwegian Booksellers Prize. This is exactly what made Maya Lunde famous, and she continues to write. And in 2019, she wrote another novel, The End of the Ocean, and again in 2022 this is her recent book which is titled as The Last Wild Horses. Now if you look at the name of these two novels, The End of the Ocean, The Last Wild Horses, you will get an idea of what exactly the novelist is all about, because in the novel, which is published in 2022, is named as The Last Wild Horses. So it has got something to deal with extinction. And again, at the end of the ocean. So the title suggests that it has got something to do with the depletion of resources. Now, these are basically the ideas that are communicated by writers who deal with climate fiction. Okay, so they will either be writing about the consequences human activities or human intervention has brought about in ecology. So what are the ecological changes that has happened because of the intervention of human beings? So it can be about the extinction of certain species, it can be about the collapse of uh, biological or biochemical cycles that happen in the nature, or it can also be about the extinction of certain species or the depletion of resources, as the title The End of the Ocean suggests, because it is a novel that deals with water crisis. Now we can come to the history of bees. Now before we get on to the story of the novel, we can take a look at the major characters. And before we come to the major characters, we can take a look at the structure of the novel. Now, the history of bees narrates three different stories. Okay, so the novel narrates three different stories. Now, all these three different stories are narrated in the first person. Okay, so മൂന്ന് നോവലുകളും narrate ചെയ്യപ്പെടുന്നത് first personലാണ്, which means that you have got the central characters of the stories narrating the stories from their perspective. അവരുടെ കാഴ്ചപ്പാടിൽ നിന്ന് central characters തന്നെയാണ് എന്ത് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, നോവൽ narrate ചെയ്യുന്നത്. So it's a novel that is narrated in the first person. Okay, so it deals with the story of a character called William. We will get to know more about William soon, but on the outset, you have to know that it tells the story of William, then it tells the story of a character called George, and it also tells the story of a character called Tao. Okay, so you have got a story dealing with a character called as William, you have got another story dealing with a character called George, and you also have got the story of another character called Tao. So the story of William is narrated by William himself, and that is why I have said that the story is narrated in first person. The story of George is narrated by George himself. And when we come to the story of Tao, we get to know about the story of Tao from her perspective. So these three novels, or sorry, these three stories are narrated by the central characters themselves. So a question can come up, it can ask about the structure of the novel. So you can say that the history of bees is written in such a way that it narrates the story of three different characters. One character is William, another character is George, and another character is Tavo. It is written in first person narrative, written as first person narrative. William narrates his own story, George narrates his own story, and Tavo narrates her own story. Now, again, the chapters are arranged in such a way, all the chapters are named after the central character. So you have got a chapter titled as William, you have got a chapter titled as Tavo, you have got a chapter titled as George, and this comes alternatively. Okay. These stories titled after the central characters are arranged alternatively, so you get to read a chapter about Tavo first, and then you get to read a chapter about William, and then you get a chapter about George, and this continues in a cyclical fashion. Okay, so this is repeated. So all the chapters, so again, you can say that all the chapters of the novel are named after the central characters of the three different stories. All the chapters are named after William, all the chapters are named after George, all the chapters are named after Tao, which is repeated cyclically. Now, that much about the structure of the novel. Now we can come to the three different characters, and we can get to know about their family. Now, we will begin with Tao, because it is her story that appears, that it is the chapter dealing with Tao that opens the book. So the story of Tao is set in future. You can see on the screen the story begins in 2098. So the story of Tao is futuristic, it is set in future, and the story takes place in district 242 Shirong, Sichuan, which is in China. Okay, so again, the story of Tao takes place in China. District 242, Shirong, Sichuan, China. Now, you have got a character there called Kuan. Kuan is Tao's husband, and they have got a 5-year-old boy called Wei Wen. Okay, so these are the characters you have to remember: Tao, her husband Kuan, and they have got a boy called Wei Wen. Okay, this can come up as a 1-mark question. They can ask who is Wei Wen. Wei Wen is Tao's son. Okay, now we can come to William. The second chapter of the novel is William. Now it is set in the past. Okay, this story takes place in 1851. It happens in England, at a province called Maryville in Hertfordshire. Okay, so the story of William takes place in Maryville, Hertfordshire, England in the year 1851. This again can come up as a 1-mark question. They can ask the setting of the story of William. Okay, so it is set in 1851. It is set in England, Maryville, Hertfordshire. Now I'll introduce you to George. The story of George takes place in the present. Okay, so it is located in USA, Autumn Hill in the district Ohio, and the year is 2007. So you have got three stories from three different times. You have got one from the past, you have got one from the future, and you have got one set in the present. Now I'll introduce you to the family of George. He has got a wife called Emma, and he has also got a son called Tom. Okay, and you have got three other characters there. You have got a character called Rick and another character called Jimmy. Now Rick and Jimmy are helpers who assist who assist George in his farm. George's farm, George assist ചെയ്യുന്ന രണ്ടുപേരാണ് റിക്കും ജിമ്മിയും. Okay, and Gareth is his friend who is a very rich farmer. Okay, now I'll introduce you to the family of William. William, his full name is William Atticus Savage. Okay, William Atticus Savage. Now I'll introduce you to his family first, then we will come to the other characters. William has got a wife called Tilda. Her full name is Matilda. William has got a son, Edmund. He has got a daughter, Charlotte. Charlotte is 14-year-old. Charlotte is a very important character in the novel. And then you have got he has got a number of children, and this is actually William's problem. He has got a number of children. He has got Edmund, he has got Charlotte, he has got Dorothea, and then he has got two other daughters, Olivia and Elizabeth, who are twins. Remember, Olivia and Elizabeth are twins. And then he has got another daughter, Martha. He has again got another daughter, Caroline, and he has again got another daughter, Georgiana. Okay, so it's a family full of children. And then you have to remember the name of Alberta. Alberta is a maid. We will come to Alberta later. And again, you can see the mention of a seed store here, and William runs a seed store. We will again come to that later. And now that we have introduced the characters in the novel, we will begin the story. Now we will begin with the story of Tavo first. The story of Tavo, as you know, is set in future. It is set in 2098. It is set in District 242. It happens in a place called Shirong in Sichuan. Okay. Now, when the story begins, we see Tavo on the top of a tree. Okay, so she is up on a ladder and she is working on a tree. Now it is then she tells us what exactly she is doing. Now she says that she is engaged in something called as hand pollination. Okay, so she says that she is one among hundreds of workers working on the farm, and she says that all of them are engaged in a process called as hand pollination. സംഭവം എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ we come to know that bees no longer exist. Okay, so we have come to a point of time when the bees have disappeared. You live in a world in 2098. You live in a world without bees, and the consequence is that in the not only bees, all the insects have disappeared. Now in the absence of insects like bees, people are forced to do the pollination manually. Namakariam, it is always the insects like bees, butterflies, dragonflies. These are the insects that help us to carry out the process called pollination. Now, for seeds to germinate, in order for fruits to be there, in order to have more and more flowers, we need insects like bees. Bees പോലെയുള്ള insects ഉണ്ടെങ്കിലേ ഏത് പ്രോസസ്സ് നടക്കത്തുള്ളൂ, pollination എന്ന് പറയുന്ന പ്രോസസ്സ് നടക്കത്തുള്ളൂ. So you live in a world where the bees have disappeared, all the insects have disappeared, and what the consequence is that you have to do the pollination manually. And when Tavo introduces herself, you look at a world where hundreds of people are engaged in doing the pollination manually. So what they do is that they go up on ladder. They have got a kind of brush with them. They would use the brush. They would brush the brush on a particular flower, and then they would brush the brush on another flower. Okay, so they carry the pollen grains from one flower to the other using the brush. So this is what she does. So again, she says that it's a kind of strenuous work. They have to be very careful because they should not damage the flowers and they should not damage the tree. So she carries out this particular task with a lot of what do you say, she carries out this task so carefully. She has to do this so carefully because if she damages the flowers or if she damages the trees, then her wages will be cut. So she carries this task very carefully, and they get break very often. And then after this introduction, we go to her house. We are introduced to her domestic space, and it is there we come across her husband Kwan, who is a very loving and caring husband, and they have also got their child, their only child Waven, who is a chubby boy, who is in and around 5 years. Okay, so they have got their child. So Tavo introduces herself as a very happy woman living in a very happy household. They have got a beautiful little family. Now, even though I mentioned that Tao is living a satisfactory, happy life, Tao is not exactly very happy because she takes us to her past. Now, when we go to Tao's past, we come to know that Tao, in her childhood, in her girlhood days, when she was a teenager, she was a very brilliant student. She was very academic. She was so curious about reading. She read a large number of books when she was at school, and she was the favorite of her teachers. And they found that Tao has got the talent to go up the ladder, okay, in her academic life. So the teacher suggested that she should go to the university. The teacher suggested that she should go to Beijing and she should pursue her higher education. But this didn't happen because Tao's family was poor. Her parents couldn't afford her education, and eventually what we come to know that she had to be married off, and they married her off to Kuan. Okay, so ഇതാണ് ടാവോയുടെ ഒരു പാസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. So she wanted to be a scholar, but she couldn't. But still, Tao had those seeds of curiosity. Um, she has got this interest in reading. So our talent, though, it is still there. Okay, so even though she couldn't continue her education, Tao within herself wanted to study. Okay, she was so curious to learn more, and it is this curiosity that takes the novel forward later. We will come to that soon. Now, what you have to know is that so this is Tao. So she was very good in her studies during her uh, teenage, but she couldn't pursue her higher education. She couldn't go to the university because her family was poor, and then she was married off to Kwan. Now Tao shares one of her personal sorrows. അതായത് തൻ്റെ വളരെ സ്വകാര്യമായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ദുഃഖം ടാവോ പങ്കുവെക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, which is that she couldn't take care of her mother in her last years. Now, her mother was sick when she was taken to the hospital. The hospital authorities took her away to some place, maybe to an old age home or some kind of an asylum where she died. Now, Tao wanted to look after her mother, but she couldn't because she was working and she had to be there on the farm. Again, these words of Tao gives us the impression of a different social order that exists in China during those years. അതായത് ടാവോയുടെ ഒരു ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്ഷനിൽ നിന്ന് നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുന്നത് എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഷീ ഈസ് ഇൻ ഫാക്ട് ലിവിങ് ഇൻ എ വേൾഡ് വിത്ത് എ ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് വേൾഡ് ഓർഡർ. അതായത് ഒരു ഫ്യൂച്ചറിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള കുറച്ച് ഡിസ്റ്റോപ്പിയൻ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സോഷ്യൽ ഓർഡറിലാണ് ആര് ജീവിക്കുന്നത്, ടാവോ ജീവിക്കുന്നത്. വേർ യു ആർ നോട്ട് സപ്പോസ് ടു സ്പെൻഡ് യുവർ ടൈം അറ്റ് ഹോം ലുക്കിംഗ് ആഫ്റ്റർ ഓൾഡ് പീപ്പിൾ ഹാസ് ടു ബി ലെഫ്റ്റ് ടു ദ കെയർ ഓഫ് ദ അതോറിറ്റീസ്. ഓക്കെ, ഒരു പർട്ടിക്കുലർ ഏജ് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ, റിട്ടയർമെൻ്റ് ഒക്കെ കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ, യു ഹാവ് ടു spend your time at an old age home. You should not be a bother to your family. അതാണ് ടാവോ സജസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, ദാറ്റ് വൺ ഇൻ ഹിസ് ഓൾഡ് ഏജ് ഷുഡ് നോട്ട് ബോദർ ദ യങ് ബിക്കോസ് ദ യങ് are supposed to spend their time fruitfully. Okay, they are supposed to spend their time doing jobs, and by the time they come after the job, they have to spend their time looking after the young in the family. Okay, so you get this impression that it is no longer a world that bothers or cares the old. Okay, so it is actually a world that looks forward to the youth, the young. Okay, so you are supposed to get back to your house, you are supposed to look after your young ones rather than wasting or bothering yourself too much about the condition of the old. So Tao had to lose her mother. Okay, now again when Tao narrates her story, she talks about something called as collapse. Okay, I'll write it here so you'll get to know. When Tao narrates her story, she frequently mentions uh, something called as collapse. She says that people started working people started working on hand pollination since the collapse. ഓക്കെ, കൊളാപ്സിന് ശേഷമാണ് ആളുകൾ ഹാൻഡ് പോളിനേഷൻ ചെയ്യാൻ തുടങ്ങിയതെന്ന് ടാവോ ഇനിഷ്യലി പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. യു ഹാവ് ടു റിമെമ്പർ ദിസ് വേർഡ് ബിക്കോസ് ദിസ് വേർഡ് ഈസ് വെരി ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് ടു ദ നോവൽ. ഓക്കെ, സോ collapse. Okay, so we will come to that later. So she says that she started working on the task of pollinating by hand ever since the collapse. Okay, so or it is after the collapse that they have started doing pollination manually. Now here uh, okay, we will come to the that character Lichiera. We will come to her later. Now, what happens is that there comes a Sunday. So Tao says that they get a day off every week. So they eagerly look forward to that break. So on a Sunday, when they were having a day off from work, Tao and Kuan decides to go out, okay, to go out to enjoy the day. Now Kwan suggests that they should go to the city. Okay, so they should go to the city, but Tao says that rather than going to the city, because if you go to the city you have to be among other people. Now Tao wants to spend some time exclusively with her husband and her child. And again, one thing is that Tao is so uh, specific about educating Waven. Okay, so she really wants Waven to be smart. So you find Tao engaging uh, her time teaching Waven maths. നമ്മൾ തുടക്കത്തിൽ തന്നെ കാണുന്നുണ്ട് ടാവോ എന്ത് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ശ്രമിക്കുന്നുണ്ട് വേവനെ മാത്സ് പഠിപ്പിക്കാനായിട്ട് ശ്രമിക്കുന്നതൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. സോ ഷീ ഈസ് വെരി പെർട്ടിക്കുലർ അബൌട്ട് ഹിസ് എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ. സോ ടാവോ do not want to waste that day. So she says that she asked Juan to go to some place where they could be alone, because there while having a day off, while enjoying the break, she also wants to teach Waven maths. Okay, so what happens is that Tao suggests that they should go to a distant hill. Okay, so it's not exactly a distant hill, it's close to their house, but they have to walk some distance. They have to walk some distance through the fields, and then they will come to a nearby hill. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, Tao suggests that they should go for a kind of picnic to a nearby hill, and they go there. Tao, Kuan, and Waven, and you get the glimpse of a very happy family. Tao is happy with herself, Kuan is happy with himself, and happier is Waven. Okay, so he has got a day to spend with his parents. So Waven, you can see that he's running, he's jumping all the way they walk to the hill. Now once they reach the hill, they spread the mattress there, and they begin to spend their time there. Okay, they are very much relaxed, and you can find Tavo opening a bottle or a can. It is actually a can. Okay, you find Tavo opening a can of plums. You must have heard of this fruit, plums. Okay, so Tavo opens a can of plums, and Waven, right from the beginning of the story, is introduced as a very hungry child. Again, his hunger demands explanation, because you live at a time when resources are very few. Okay, resources ഒക്കെ വളരെ കുറവുള്ള ഒരു കാലഘട്ടത്തെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് ടാവോ സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്. So resources are very few, and they have to uh, live their life with very little money. Okay, so both Tao and Kuan are conscious of their little resources, and they do not have much money. So they are very particular, they are also very particular about saving money. So they have got a piggy bank. ഈ piggy bank പോലത്തെ നമ്മൾ വഞ്ചി എന്ന് പറയുന്നില്ല, they have got something like a piggy bank where they save their extra money. So they live at a time when they are without money and they are without resources, and Waven is a hungry child. He always demands more. Okay, so what happens is that when Tavo opens the can of plums, he eats all the plums himself. Okay, it just had 3 or 4 plums. So what happens is that Tao and Kuan offers their share to Waven. So Waven eats all the plums. Now what happens is that both Tao and Kuan, they have spread a mattress there. So both Tao and Kuan lie down, and they talk to each other. Waven is playing nearby. And what happens is that both Tao and Kuan falls asleep for a brief moment. ഒരു നിമിഷ നേരത്തേക്ക് both of them fall asleep, and by the time they wake up, they do not find Waven nearby. Okay, so they call out his name, they go to nearby places in search of him, but he is nowhere to be found. Okay, so this creates a sort of panic in both Kuan and Tao. They are panicked and they run around calling out his name. Tao goes very far. She goes down to the valley, and Kuan also runs everywhere calling out the name of Wei-wen. What happens is that sometime later, Tao finds Kuan carrying Wei-wen in his arms. Okay, so he has found Wei-wen. Now he has found Wei-wen close to a small uh, a kind of a pond. Okay, it's not actually a pond. So he has found um, Weyven near to a water body, and he found Weyven um, crouching down on his legs. Okay, so what happens is that by the time Kuan found Weyven, he was very pale and he was also struggling for his breath. Okay, he was also struggling for his breath. Okay, so this is the condition in which Kuan has found Weyven, found him close to a water body. He was sitting, he was not exactly sitting, he was crouching um, forward, like uh, he was lying face down, and he was struggling for breath, and his body has also become very pale. Now what happens is that both Kuan and Tao takes him, they run, and by the time they reach the hospital, uh, Weyven has nearly stopped breathing. Okay, he is still breathing, but his breathing has become very faint. Now he is immediately taken in an ambulance to a better hospital, and we find both Kuan and Tao waiting in what you can call as a waiting room. Okay, they are not allowed to see Weyven. അതായത് Weyven ഒരു better ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിലേക്ക് മാറ്റുന്നു. He is taken away in an ambulance. Kuan and Tao follows in a car, and by the time they reach the hospital, Weyven is already taken to the emergency room, and Kuan and Tao are asked to wait in a waiting room. They wait there endlessly. Okay, they wait there for days, they wait there for weeks, but there is no information. They try to approach the nurses, they try to approach the doctor, but what they ask is to wait. Okay, so we find that both Tao and Kuan are not given any updates. Okay, so they have to wait, and then one day when Tao has lost all her patience, she demands that she should be allowed to see her son. Okay, so she loses control. um, she expresses her outrage, and she demands that being the mother, she should be allowed to see her child. But what happens is that right then they inform that Wei-wen has been taken away to a better hospital in Beijing. Okay, so Kuan and Tao learns this with a certain amount of shock, because taking someone to Beijing is not a good news. Okay, so they are informed that the condition of Wei-wen was very bad. They are also informed that he was being given uh, uh, oxygen artificially, so they are informed that he was on the ventilator, and they are informed that he is now being taken away to Beijing, and both Tao and Kuan are asked to go back to their home. Okay, രണ്ടുപേരോടും വീട്ടിലേക്ക് പോകാനായിട്ട് ആര് ആവശ്യപ്പെടുന്നു? ഹോസ്പിറ്റൽ അതോറിറ്റീസ് ആവശ്യപ്പെടുന്നു. Now once they reach the home, Tao is affected by a certain amount of guilt, because she feels that it is because of her decision that they have lost Weyven, because it is she who wanted to go to the hills, and she thinks that Kuan might be blaming her at the back of his mind. Okay, അതായത് ഉള്ളിൻ്റെ ഉള്ളിൽ കുവാൻ തന്നെ കുറ്റപ്പെടുത്തുന്നുണ്ടാകും, താൻ കാരണമാണ് തങ്ങൾക്ക് തങ്ങളുടെ മകനെ നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടത് എന്ന് ആര് ചിന്തിക്കുന്നു? ടാവോ ചിന്തിക്കുന്നു, and she is very much affected by this guilt consciousness, and because of this guilt consciousness, Tao finds it very difficult to communicate with Kuan. Now, Kuan at the other end is a grieved father, because he was very much attached to Weyven. Because at the beginning of the novel, you find Kuan and Weyven playing with each other. So he was a father who pampered his son. So Tao feels that Kwan might be uh, blaming her at the back of his mind. Kwan does not express it, but still Tao feels that Kwan might be feeling it that way. So Tao finds it difficult to talk to Kwan, and Kwan also find it difficult to talk to Tao. Kwan approaches Tao, but Tao does not feel like talking back to Kwan. Now, what happens is that one day, so in between, you find Tao calling the hospital, and what happens is that the hospital authorities again say that they have no information, no information, no information. Tao calls again and again on the phone, and still she gets the same reply. So, what happens is that one day, Tao decides to go to Beijing. Okay, now Kwan says that she should not go because they do not have any hope. Again, Kwan says that they do not know any whereabouts regarding which hospital Waven is taken to. Wavena ഏത് ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിലേക്കാണ് കൊണ്ടുപോയിരിക്കുന്നതെന്ന് പോലും അറിയത്തില്ല. So Kwan says that Tao is setting out on a task that is going to prove wasteful. Okay, വളരെ വേസ്റ്റ്ഫുൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഫ്യൂട്ടൈൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു അറ്റംപ്റ്റിനാണ് ടാവോ ഇറങ്ങിത്തിരിക്കുന്നതെന്ന് ആര് വിശ്വസിക്കുന്നു? ക്വാൻ വിശ്വസിക്കുന്നു. And again, they do not have money because Beijing is far away. It is thousands of kilometers away from uh, their district, which is district 242, and Tao has will have to spend the money on the piggy bank. Okay, so she will have to spend the money out of their savings, which is their only hope for future. So again, Kwan at first does not allow Tao to take the money, but then Kwan yields because at the back of his mind, Kwan also wants his son back. Okay, he also wants to know the whereabouts of their son. So eventually Kwan yields, and what we find is that Tao sets out on an indefinite journey. Okay, so Tao യാത്ര തിരിക്കുന്നതാണ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. She takes the money with her and she sets out, and she travels by train. She travels thousands of kilometers and she reaches Beijing. Now, what is interesting is that the Beijing in 2098 is presented as a deserted city. It's a city without people. It's a city abandoned by people. So it looks very much like a dystopian city. നമ്മൾ ഇപ്പം എന്താ ഈ ഫ്യൂച്ചറിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഡിസ്റ്റോപ്പിയൻ ഫിലിംസിലൊക്കെ കാണുന്നത് പോലെ ബീജിംഗ് ഈസ് പ്രസൻറ്റഡ് as a deserted city. It's a city without people because something has happened there. Some kind of climate catastrophe has happened there, and because of that, most of the people has abandoned the city and they went elsewhere. Okay, so you find Tao moving through a deserted place, and again there are episodes where Tao is being attacked by the few people left behind in Beijing, who are presented as cannibalistic. Okay, so cannibalistic instincts ഉള്ള people ആളുകൾ ടാവോയെ ആക്രമിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കുന്നതൊക്കെ കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. So I just mentioned that so you will get a better picture of what kind of a Beijing is presented in the novel. So it's a Beijing that is left behind by people. Only a few people are left behind, and they are without food, they are without resources, and because of that they have started eating each other. And you come across a certain episode where Tao is being chased down by uh, by three teenagers. Okay, one girl and two boys. So somehow she escapes from their hands by offering whatever money she had with her. Again, it is not exactly like that everywhere. A few people are left behind who are still good, struggling with their daily life. Especially there is a particular episode where she goes to a restaurant where she comes across a boy who has got lean and who looks very bad because of not having enough food. So those details are not important as far as your examination purpose or this particular lecture is concerned. So anyway, what we find is that Tao goes from one hospital to the other. She travels far and wide. She travels far across. She travels all over Beijing, but still she couldn't find any information related to Wei Wen. Okay, so what happens is that eventually Tavo spends some time in the library trying to figure out what exactly would have happened to Waven. Now this is the mystery part because they have no idea what exactly happened to Waven because he was a very healthy child. He never had any uh, health problems, so he is not without any kind of a problem related to his health. So this adds to the mystery. Okay, so what happens is that Tao spends her time in the library in order to find out what exactly might have happened to Waven. At first she suspects that it could be some allergy caused by the plums. Okay, so but then that cannot happen because he was never allergic to food, and again he never have any health records suggesting that he could have had some other problems. So she goes through a large number of books, and she eventually comes to the conclusion that Waven could have suffered some kind of a bite. Okay, some kind of a bite. At first she suspects that this could be a snake, and she reads a number of books dealing with venomous snakes in China. But again, she indicates that snakes are very rare. But again, she suspects that it could be some snake. But soon, very soon, she comes to the conclusion. She realizes what exactly happened to Waven. We will come to that soon. Now, while Tao is spending her time in Beijing, while she is spending her time in the library reading books, one day she stays there at a hotel. One day she finds a woman in her room. Okay, ഒരു ദിവസം when Tao comes out of a bath, she finds a woman standing in her room, and the woman demands Tao to go along with her. Now, what happens is that this particular woman, who is actually a security guard, she takes Tao to a person called as Li Chiera. Now, Li Chiera is the leader of the committee, which is China's executive body. Which again, you have to understand that Li Chiera is the secretary of the Communist Party of China. Okay, the name of the party is not mentioned, but you know that China is ruled by the Communist Party, and this particular woman who appears in the room of Tao takes Tao to a woman called Li Chiera, who is the leader of the Communist Party, which means that Li Chiera must be the president of China then. Okay, so again, the name president or the name of the party is not mentioned. She is simply described as the leader of the committee. Again, this can come up as a one mark question. They can ask who is Li Chiera. Li Chiera is the leader of uh, the committee, which is China's executive body. Okay, the committee is China's executive body, so she is the leader of the committee. Now, it is from Li Chiera, or it is from the meeting between Tao and Li Chiera we come to know what exactly happened to Waven. Now, what happened to Waven was that he suffered a bite, as Tao has expected, as Tao has speculated. He suffered a bite, but it was not from a snake, but he suffered the bite of bees. Now, at the beginning of the novel, it is described that the bees have disappeared, and at the beginning of the novel, it is said that it is because of the disappearance of bees that Tao and other people of a district had to engage in hand pollination. And what happens is that finally, the bees who disappeared in the past have returned. Okay, so the entire novel is all about the return of the bees. Okay, so Waven suffered bite from the bees, and he was allergic to bees, and it is because of this that he struggled whatever he went through. He became unconscious. He struggled for his breath, and finally Li Chiara takes Tao to Huan. Sorry, she takes Tao to Weiwen, and she takes Tao to a hospital where the body of Weiwen is preserved, which means that Weiwen has died. Okay, he has died because of the allergy caused by uh, in, caused by the bite of the bees, and Li Chiara takes Tao to the hospital where Weiwen's body is preserved for future studies. Okay, not only for future studies, he has become some kind of an emblem. Okay, he has become some kind of an emblem. He has become the emblem of hope. Okay, that is how the novel ends, where the image of Vaven becomes the emblem or the sign of hope, because the return of bees promises a better future for humanity. Because without bees, we cannot exist. Because without bees, there won't be flowers, without bees, there won't be fruits, and without bees, there won't be seeds. So the return of bees, കാരണം നോവൽ ഉടനീളം പറയുന്നുണ്ട് how the agriculture, throughout the novel it is said how the agriculture field has suffered because of the absence of bees. So the return of bees is a big promise for the field of agriculture. Again, the return of bees is considered as uh, one of the biggest hopes for humanity. So what happens is that Vaven's body is preserved by the committee because he is seen as an emblem of hope. And now Lee Chiara asks Tao to be a brave mother, and she asks Tao to deliver a speech before the people. Okay, so this is how the novel ends. Okay, or this is how the story of Tao ends. We will come back to Tao later after narrating the other stories. Okay, now we will come to the story of William. Now, William was a student of biology or natural sciences, and what happens is that he enters as a research assistant under a famous professor called Ram. Okay, so young William, who was someone with a lot of academic dreams. He was a curious student of biology or natural sciences, and he enrolled himself as an assistant, a research assistant under Ram. Now, during those days, William dreamed of becoming a great academic. Now, again, William dreamt of becoming an academic. He wanted to become somebody like his teacher. Okay, so William's teacher is Ram. He wanted to be someone like Ram. And one day, what happens is that Ram gives William an opportunity. Okay, so they live in Maryville. Maryville is actually a village in England. So the people of Maryville are uneducated. They are people from rural background. And one day, what happens is that Ram gives William an opportunity to speak before the public. Okay, now William finds it as a big opportunity because it is the first time that he is going to deliver a lecture, and now William was confused regarding the topic he should take. Now Ram suggests that perhaps William can talk about what you call as the microscope. Okay, so when William was confused with the topic, Ram suggests that perhaps he can introduce microscope to the people of Maryville. So what happens is that William begins to deliver the lecture, and all the people from the village are gathered there. The entire village is assembled there, and he begins to talk about microscope. Now, what happens is that uh, he began his lecture really well, but as the lecture progresses, he begins to talk about how microscope has revealed the minute aspects of the insect called bees. Okay, so eventually his lecture deviates to the topic of bees, and he makes use of the bees to demonstrate how far microscope has helped to look into the details of the bees. Now, very soon the lecture takes an awkward turn when William begins to talk about the private parts of bees. Okay, so he soon begins to talk about the genitals of bees, and the people of Maryville, who are very orthodox, find it very offending. Okay, so because a lot of teenaged girls are gathered there, old age people are there, and the conservative society of Maryville find it very offensive. They find it against the dictates of religion. They find it very unreligious to talk about a topic like genitals. So what happens is that William progresses to talk more and more about the genitals of bees, and they find it very offending, and people begin to laugh. Okay, so people begin to laugh, and many of the girls gathered there, they begin to blush, and many of the people begin to look down, many of the people try to look away, and they really want to escape from the place. Now William realizes this from the expression of people. He realizes that his lecture has become very awkward, and he somehow ends his lecture. Okay, and by the time he ends his lecture, his Professor Ram makes fun of William. Okay, now what happens is that while the whole process was going on, while the lecture was going on, William has noticed a particular girl called Matilda. Okay, so she was one among the people gathered there for the lecture, and William notices that it was only Matilda who didn't laugh at him. Okay, again, he found her very beautiful. Now, what happens is that at the end of the lecture, when most people simply ran away from the place, when most people try to uh, uh, make fun of William, Matilda was the only girl who really came forward to congratulate William for his lecture. Now, as you can expect, what follows is an episode of love. William falls in love with Matilda, whom he calls as Tilda. Okay, so very soon he marries Matilda, but uh, he initially thought that because Matilda has come forward to congratulate him, William at first thought that Matilda was an intelligent girl. Okay, again he thought that she was someone who was very much interested in academics, but his expectations were wrong, because Matilda was just an ordinary girl. Okay, now, anyway, he married Matilda, and he didn't get any kind of academic assistance from her. The only assistance he got from her that was that she bore a number of his children. Okay, so she gave birth to a number of his children. The first one, the elder one, was Edmund. Then there was Charlotte. This was followed by Dorothea. Again, they were blessed with twins, Olivia and Elizabeth, and this continued and continued until they had a very little girl called Georgiana. Now comes a very important aspect of the story. Now, even though William was very particular about having uh, a strong academic life, very soon he ended up in a domestic space where he couldn't simply do his work. You can simply imagine a house with a number of children. Okay, a house with a demanding wife. Because again, William had to feed his wife and his children. So he could no longer dedicate his time exclusively for reading. So this affected William very much, but still he was someone who decided to give a fight. So what happened was that in order to support his family, he soon opened a seed store. Okay, a seed store where he sold the seeds of major crops or flowering plants. Oh, okay, so it was a store where all kinds of seeds were available. So what happened was that he spent his time at the seed store in order to uh, earn enough money to maintain his family, and again part of the time he spent for his reading. Now comes a very important episode. One day he paid a visit to his Professor Ram. Okay. One day he visited his Professor Ram, and when he visited Ram, what happened was that Ram severely rebuked William for the decisions he has made in his life. Now Ram rebukes William for making the wrong decisions. He blames William for marrying Matilda, and he again blames William for becoming the father of any number of children. Okay, now Ram says that he was in fact deceiving his teacher. Okay, now Ram says that he took up William because he found him a very promising scholar. But in fact, now Ram says that William has breached, okay, William has breached that faith he had in him. Okay, so Ram progresses to says that William was in fact cheating him. Now Ram says that William has really disappointed him as a scholar. Now this particular act from Ram was very shocking to William, because William always looked upon William always looked upon at Ram as someone who motivated him, someone who inspired him, and William always wanted to be appreciated by Ram. Okay, he always wanted to be appreciated by his teacher, and in order to get that appreciation, in order to get the approval of Ram, that William always spent his time in reading. Okay, now since Ram has rebuked him severely, William becomes upset. He becomes so upset that he falls into a period of acute depression. Okay, so at the beginning of William's story, you find William on the bed. He is depressed. He do not have any other health issues, but he is sick mentally. So what happens is that at the initial stages of the story, you find William on his bed, incapable of moving out. Okay, he does not finds uh, the spirit. Okay, he does not find the mental strength to move out of the bed, so he spends his time on the bed. He is mentally sick. He does not uh, ba- he does not bathe properly. He would not change his clothes frequently. He would not take care of his health. He would not eat properly, and the condition of his family is in absolute trouble, because there is no one to open the seed store, and you find Tilda or Matilda struggling to maintain a family full of children. Now, frequently his children would come to him, especially the girls. They would come to him. They would not enter his bedroom because, out of respect, he has forbidden them from entering the bedroom. They do not have the courage to come near to their father, but still they would stand outside the window and they would sing songs for him. That is how it begins. Okay, they sing songs of Christmas for him, and they try to encourage their father to get back to his life. And also, Tilda tries her best to inspire him, to motivate him, but at first, William finds it very difficult. Now, while he is in his bed, even though the girls come, his son Edmund would not come there frequently. Now, William wants his son to visit him. Okay, now again we come to another important aspect of the story. William the father has got an obsession for his son Edmund. Okay, William has got an obsession for his son Edmund. He loves him very much, and William hopes that one day Edmund would take up whatever he has begun. Okay, താൻ തുടങ്ങി വെച്ചത് തൻ്റെ മകൻ ഏറ്റെടുക്കുമെന്നും പൂർത്തിയാക്കുമെന്നും ആര് വിചാരിക്കുന്നു? വില്യം വിചാരിക്കുന്നു. He expects that one day his son Edmund would get on to his shoes and would fulfill whatever he wanted in his life. It is this hope that um, that develops a kind of obsession for his son Edmund. Okay, so William wants Edmund to visit him, which do not happen. But what happens is that one day William finds Edmund by his bedside. Edmund comes and he asks his father to get up. He asks his father to get back to his usual life. And what happens is that Edmund leaves a book behind on the bed. Okay, it's a book that deals with bees. Okay, now when Edmund is gone, he spends very little time there. When Edmund is gone, William looks at the book, he turns the pages, and immediately William finds the spirit to read again. Okay, now that his son has visited him, William found the motivation that was really missing. Now he finds remotivated. Now what happens is that he gets out of the bed, he comes to the window and he begins to look at the sunlight. which clearly gives us the indication that William is now back on his ways. Now very soon you find William coming out of his bedroom. He visits his wife, he visits his daughters, and you also find William getting back to his seed shop. So he has decided to give his life a second try. Okay, so he has decided to give his life a second try. Now, what happens is that William comes out. He again begins to mingle with the society, and it is here we are introduced to a character called as Alberta. You have to remember the name. Alberta is a distant relative of Matilda. Now, Alberta uh, is a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. So Alberta, she is not married. So Alberta is introduced as a distant relative of Matilda, who used to assist William in the seed store. Okay, so it was Alberta who used to clean the store. It was Alberta who used to assist William whenever William was not in the store. Again, she was someone who put things in their respective places. So she was a sort of helper in the shop. Now, since his time of depression, Alberta has moved out and she started working in a clothes store. Okay, cloth. Okay, so maybe a dry cleaning store or something. So she started working elsewhere. Now, what happens is that, as I have just mentioned, William has found the energy to work again. He has decided to give his life a second try, and he comes to the seed store. And at first, he expected that since the shop has not been open for some time, everything will be in absolute disorder. But what happens is that when he comes to the shop, when he opens it, he finds the place very clean. Okay, it is absolutely clean. It looks like a new store. Everything is set in proper places. Everything is in perfect order. And it is then we come to know about the character Charlotte. Okay, now Charlotte is William's uh, eldest daughter. Now Charlotte is 14 years old, and it was Charlotte who has cleaned the shop for her father. Now Charlotte, we find Charlotte as someone who is so attached to her father, and she is someone who wants to do everything to get her father back. Okay, so she is so dedicated to her father. Again, you find a particular episode where when William was sick, when William was bedridden, when he was suffering depression, Charlotte came to his room and she arranged the books in his library. Okay, so we come to know that Charlotte is someone who, just like her father, is so much interested in books. She reads a lot. She very often, again William mentions that very often Charlotte would come to his room, she would borrow a book, she would go away, and then she would come back and put the book in the proper place. And again, as I just mentioned, you come across an episode where Charlotte arranges her father's books in the library. She arranges them alphabetic in the order of the alphabet. She arranges them perfectly. So this gives us the impression. This gives us impression regarding two important facts. One thing is that Charlotte loves her father very much. She wants to do everything so that her father would feel really better. And again, Charlotte is someone who reads a lot, someone who, just like her father, is interested in academics. Now, what happens is that, as we have seen, William is back. He finds the energy to work again. He spends his time on the seed store, and parallelly, he begins to read a lot about bees. Okay, he reads a lot about bees, and he comes to the conclusion that bees can be domesticated. Okay, he comes to the conclusion that bees can be domesticated. He comes to the conclusion that bees uh, can be tamed. Okay, this is a word. So already there are people who do beekeeping. Okay, തേനീച്ച വളർത്തൽ നമ്മൾ കേട്ടിട്ടില്ലേ? So already in Hertfordshire there are people who do beekeeping, but William comes to the conclusion that this can be done in a perfect manner. This can be done in a professional manner. So what happens is that William begins to spend his time designing beehives. Okay, okay, this is an important part of the story. um, he spends a part of his time designing beehives. So he reads a lot about the designs that are used by farmers in contemporary England. So he reads a lot about beekeeping. He reads a lot about beehives, and he designs a beehive of his own. And once he has designed the beehive, he is so excited that he goes and meets Ram. Okay, so William finally wants to prove Ram that he is in fact a very good scholar, that he is still in his spirits, and that he has not conceded defeat. Okay, so റാമിന്റെ മുമ്പിൽ എങ്ങനെയെങ്കിലും ജയിക്കുക എന്നൊരു ഉദ്ദേശം ആർക്കുണ്ട്? വില്യമിനുണ്ട്. So once he has designed uh, a particular kind of beehive, he approaches Ram. Again, the result is not something that he has expected, because when he comes to Ram, he goes through the details of whatever William has drawn. uh, he goes through it, and then he informs that this design is already made by a German beekeeper, not just a beekeeper, a biologist. Okay, so he says that this is not something new. In a journal, there has been in a recent journal, there has been articles about a German biologist who has designed a similar beehive. So what happens is that William is absolutely disheartened. He feels absolutely discouraged, and he comes back to his house. Okay, now what happens is that again he is on the verge of another depression. He is absolutely heartbroken, and he is on the verge of another depression. And what happens is that Charlotte helps her father to revise his design. Okay, she suggests a few changes which William finds very striking. Okay, this again proves how intelligent Charlotte is. So she suggests some changes, she suggests some alterations that could dramatically change the design. So the moment when Charlotte reveals these details, it is something like eureka for William, because whatever Charlotte has suggested opens the inner eyes of William. William finally realizes that he is on the verge of something dramatic. Okay, something that is going to create history. He realizes that Charlotte's suggestion is going to make him, his family, and his family proud. Now, what happens is that William begins to draw designs according to the suggestions made by Charlotte, and he publishes an article. He in fact sends a letter to that German biologist. Okay, so നേരത്തെ Ram mentioned ചെയ്തല്ലോ. Now he sends a letter to uh, uh, the German biologist, and he also invites a number of people to his house in order to make a presentation. Okay, and he also files for the patent. Patent കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവുമല്ലോ. So he also makes an application to get patent for what he calls as Savage's standard hives. Okay, so this is how he has named his new design. Okay, so he has named it as Savage's standard hives. So he invites a number of people to introduce his discovery to them, and he has also filed or applied for a patent. Patent means എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു പ്രോഡക്റ്റ് നിർമ്മിക്കാനുള്ള അവകാശത്തിനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ പേറ്റന്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. സോ വൺസ് യു ഹാവ് ഗോട്ട് ദ പേറ്റന്റ്, നോബഡി വുഡ് കോപ്പി യുവർ ഡിസൈൻ. സോ its rights will be protected. So he files or he applies for a patent, and he celebrates the occasion. He invites a number of people to make a presentation, and there comes the day for the presentation. A number of beekeepers, a number of biologists, some of the students of വില്യമിൻ്റെ പഴയ സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് ഒക്കെ വരുന്നുണ്ട്, and also Ram and Edmund is there. Now before we come to that, you have got to know something about Edmund. Even though all these things are happening in the life of William, even though he is trying every which way to do something new, even though he is attempting his best to create something new, Edmund is not at all interested. Now, as I mentioned earlier, William has got this obsession for Edmund. He wants Edmund to love him, and he also desires the attention of Edmund. He wants Edmund to pay attention to his discoveries. Okay, But what happens is that you find Edmund as someone who is not at all interested in whatever that is happening at the household. Now, he is someone who comes late to the house, he comes only at night, and then he would sleep deep into the day. രാവിലെ ഒത്തിരി നേരം വെളുത്താലും ആരും എഴുന്നേക്കില്ല, എഡ്മണ്ട് എഴുന്നേക്കത്തില്ല. And also he appears as someone who is not at all interested in anything. And again William and Tilda were keeping money, they were saving money for Edmund's higher education, but it seems that Edmund is also sick in a certain way. Okay, he appears sick, and there are a number of episodes where William quarrels with Edmund because William does not get the due attention from Edmund. Okay, so because of that, William quarrels with Edmund, but Tilda intervenes, or she interferes in these quarrels. So you have got a problematic father-son relationship there. So William has got this obsession for Edmund. He wants the attention of Edmund, but Edmund behaves uh, very indifferently. Okay, so and then we come to this episode where William has prepared this Savage Standard Hives. So he has invited everyone for the presentation. He makes the presentation, and finally, while this when this presentation is going on, Ram is there, Edmund is also there. These are two people who are important to William. Okay, so William, the entire life of William is all about attempts he makes to get the appreciation of Ram and his son Edmund. So finally, when this presentation is going on, both Ram and Edmund are there, and William presents it beautifully. And what happens is that Ram comes forward and congratulates William for his discovery. Ram says that you have finally done something that is really outstanding, and William is without words. Okay, so William is absolutely mind blown. He stands there uh, bathing in the appreciations showered by Ram, and also uh, he finds Edmund looking curiously back at him. Okay, so this is a match win situation for William. So finally, he gets appreciation from Ram, and he also gets the attention of his son Edmund. And then comes the tragedy. I have already informed you that when he has got this design, when he made this discovery with the help of Charlotte, uh, he wrote a letter to uh, the German biologist, and then comes the German biologist's reply. In his reply letter, the German biologist says that whatever you have designed is already designed by an American biologist. Okay, he says that this particular American biologist has already designed this particular kind of hive, and he has got the patent. Okay, now what is interesting to notice is that William was a bit late. Okay, he was late by a few days. So he was doing this in England, and it happened in America. So you have got two biologists or two naturalists working in two different places, working on the same thing, and William was late by a few days. He was unfortunately a bit late, and the patent was given to someone else, a scientist in America. Now, for William, this is the end of everything. Okay, this is the end of everything. He forsakes his studies, he abandons his reading, he abandons his research, he abandons his seed store, and finally, again, he gets back to his bed. He is depressed one more time. Okay, this is where the story ends. But there are a few more facts that you will learn, you have to know, but we will come to that after we come across the story of George. Okay, so keep in mind the story of William is not over. There are a couple of episodes left, but we will come to that once we look or once we come across the story of George. Now, the story of George is simple. It is not complicated like the story of William, or it is not complicated like the story of Tao. It's a very simple story. You have got George, a farmer, a beekeeper, who lives in Ohio, USA in the year 2007. Now Emma is his wife and they have got a son called Tom. Now again, you have got a father who is obsessed with his son. Okay, just like William and Edmund, you have got another problematic father-son relationship here. You have got George who is obsessed with his only child Tom. Now Tom is a student at the university. He's doing his graduation there, and George is a farmer, a beekeeper who dedicates his entire time to the keeping of bees. Now he has got two helpers. One is Rick and another one is Jimmy. These are two people who assist George in his farm. And you have got another fellow farmer called Gareth. Now Gareth was someone who studied at school with George, so they were together at school. Now Gareth was someone uh, who was not respected, or who was left out by other students in the class because he was not good to look at. He was a kind of a diminished figure, so nobody never really paid any attention to Gareth, but George was always there by the side of Gareth. So we get to know how George used to take Gareth during those school days to his house. They used to have food together. Now the mother of George used to cook for Gareth, so they were friends from school days. Now Gareth was very much thankful for the kind of attention he got from George, because George was the only one who considered, or who has given who has expressed friendly affection for Gareth. Now what happened was that as time progressed, Gareth, who was a workaholic, he spent his time working on the farm, and he became a very successful beekeeper. Okay, he became a very successful beekeeper. He had hundreds of hives. Okay, so he had hundreds of hives, so he was a very productive farmer, and because of his hard work he began to earn a lot of money. So Gareth is presented as a very rich farmer who had hundreds and hundreds of hives. So that much for Gareth. We will now concentrate on the story of George and the problem between George and Tom. Now the problem between George and Tom begins when Tom comes home for vacation. Okay, he comes for a break. He spends a week with George and Emma, and it is then Tom says that he has decided to pursue his higher education. Tom says that one of his professors has noted that he has got the talent to write. Okay, George says that one of his professors has discovered that Tom has got the talent to write, and the professor has suggested that Tom should pursue his higher education so that one day he can get a PhD. Now, this particular information upsets George because George wants Tom to walk in his footsteps. Now, George wants Tom to return home after graduation and take over the farm. Okay, because George dreams of having a farm like Garrett's. Okay, now he expected that if his son is educated, he can do, or he can maintain his farm in a better way. He can take his farm to the next level. So George always wanted Tom to return. He always wanted George to come back home after graduation and take up his farm. Now this is a conflict. Now Tom wants to become a writer, he wants to pursue his higher education, he wants to have a PhD, while on the other hand, George wants Tom to return home after graduation and take up the farm. Now this creates a sort of friction between George and Tom, but still what happens is that Tom is stubborn with his decision. Okay, uh, nothing happens the way George expects, and what happens is that anyway, even though George is upset with Tom, George is presented as a man with a kind of humor sense. Okay, so George is an interesting character. He has got a kind of humor sense, and there was one particular occasion where George traveled all the way to Tom's university in order to have in order to have a talk with his professor, and he wanted to abuse his professor for misleading Tom. But again, what happens is that by the time he reaches the university and meets the professor, George forgets whatever he was there for. Okay, so in a way, he finally yields to the desire of Tom. Okay, മകന്റെ ആഗ്രഹം അതിന് വഴങ്ങി കൊടുക്കുന്ന രീതിയാണ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. ബട്ട് സ്റ്റിൽ ജോർജ് ഹാസ് ഗോട്ട് ദിസ് പ്രോബ്ലം അറ്റ് ദ ബാക്ക് ഓഫ് ഹിസ് മൈൻഡ് ആൻഡ് ഹി quarrels with Emma over Tom's decision. Now what happens is that one day, this is the most important part of George's story. One day when he went to the place, okay, so uh, there is a river mentioned in the story called Alabest River. Okay, now it is close to the banks of Alabest River that George was keeping his hives. Now one day when George went to his farm beside Alabest River, and when he started opening the beehives, he was shocked to find that the bees have disappeared. Okay, now this is a very important aspect of the novel as a whole. So one day when George went to his farm, and when he started opening the hives, he has found that his bees have disappeared. A few are left behind, a few young bees, and the queen was there, but most of the drones, most of the worker bees, they have all disappeared. Now George is absolutely shocked, he is dismayed, and he goes around the place looking for the bees, but none of them is there. And it is then he comes to know that this is not uh, something that has happened just to him alone. Okay, now he comes to know that this is not an isolated case. He comes to know that this has happened also in the case of Gareth, and he also comes to know from the media that this is happening everywhere across USA, and nobody knows why, nobody knows how, and nobody knows what exactly is happening to bees. But very soon it is revealed that this is because of the use of pesticides. Okay, so um, uh, we are already told in the novel, we are already told in the story of George, that farmers in the USA have started using pesticides in the farms. Okay, in order to improve their product, in order to improve their productivity, in order to improve their yield, they have started using pesticides, and it is now understood that the use of pesticides are the reason for the disappearance of the bees. Now, there was also another reason pointed out as the disappearance of bees. Now, that was the presence of a tiny parasite, a kind of parasite called Varroa destructor. Now, this is a kind of parasite that attacked bees. Okay, now these are the two reasons brought out by scientists as a sort of explanation for the disappearance of bees. Okay, so they said that the disappearance, the large scale massive disappearance of bees could either be because of the use of pesticides, or it can also be because of a parasite called Varroa destructor which fed on bees. Now anyway, uh, the bee colonies collapsed, and the media and the scientists began to use a technical name for the mass disappearance of bees, and they called it as the colony collapse disorder. Okay, which is abbreviated as CCD. Now again, this can come up as a good question, the full form of CCD, or what is CCD, or they can again ask what is colony collapse disorder. Now colony collapse disorder is the mass disappearance of bees, either because of the use of pesticides or because of a parasite called Varroa destructor. 1 minute. Okay, so anyway, George has suffered a major setback because of the disappearance of bees, because disappearance of bees meant that he has lost everything. He has lost everything because already he was running his farm out of loan. Okay, he was running his farm out of a loan from the bank. He was already in debt, and he worked on with the hope that one day he can overcome his debt, and he worked on with the hope that one day his son Tom would come to his assistance. But neither of the two happened. The beast disappeared, everything collapsed, he has lost everything, and also there was no sign of Tom coming to his assistance. Now, what happens is that, but still, George was not ready to give up. He went on working on his farm. He constructed new hives, and he started to work again. He again attempted to begin from the scratches. Begin from the scratches means begin from nothing. Okay, so he again attempted to begin from scratches. He again attempted to revive his farm, but one day while working on the farm, George suffers a heart attack. Okay, he suffers a heart attack and he falls, he collapses to the ground, and by the time he collapses to the ground, he has an impression that someone is coming to his is someone who is running to him, someone is running to him calling out the name dad. Okay, so finally, by the time he falls, he gets the impression that Tom has finally come to him. Tom has in fact come to him. Now, what we see is that George didn't die, but still he suffered some health issues after the attack. He was having some problem, but still Tom came to him. He was by his bedside. He was with him at the family, and what happened is that Tom has decided to abandon his studies and assist his father, just like what George has expected every time during his life. Finally, his desire or uh, his wish is fulfilled. Tom has abandoned his work and has come to assist George in his farm. So what we find is that George is finally a very happy father, and he after the attack he suffered some problems, like he has got shivering. He was not able to walk properly, but with the help of Tom, he finally regains his complete health. Okay, so that is where the story of George and Tom ends. So they are a happy family now. George and Tom works together, and George has finally overcome his problem. He was having he used to have uh, he was having bad health. Sorry, he was having bad health, but anyway, with the help of Tom, George regains his health perfectly. So father and son together, they begin to work at the farm. This is where the story of George and Tom comes to an end. Wait. Now, what happened to William after his major upset? We will come back to that. What happened to uh, William after his major upset? Now, there is one point that I failed to mention. William, even when he was attempting everything, even when he was uh, trying his best to do something, after his first depression, he suffered an upset in his life. Now, that is related to Edmund. One day, when William closed his seed shop and when he was on his way back to his home, there is a tavern. Tavern, you know, that something what we call as pub. Okay, what we call as pub, a place where they sell alcohol. Now, on his way back to his home, there is a tavern close to his seed shop, and now while he was passing by the tavern, he came to hear the sound of a girl. Okay, from the tavern, from the pub, he came to hear the sound of a girl, and he immediately realized that the girl is Alberta. Now, what happens is that he finds a young boy along with Alberta engaged in lovemaking. Okay, and that young boy is none other than Edmund. Okay, so to his shock, he finds Edmund and the maid Alberta engaging in lovemaking. So this was a major upset to William. So followed by that, there was a quarrel in the house. Anyway, they somehow solved the issue, but it is not mentioned how. Anyway, the issue was settled, and again, William comes to know that Edmund is alcoholic. Okay, so he went to the tavern not only to make love with Alberta, who was kind of working there as a bar girl. So he went there not only to make love with the bar girl, but also to drink. So Edmund has become an alcoholic as well. This was an upset to William, but somehow they must have solved the situation. It is not mentioned, but still, it is afterwards that William designs the Savages Standard Hive with the help of Charlotte. Nothing much regarding to Edmund is mentioned then, but towards the end of the novel, we come to know what exactly happened after William has entered his second phase of depression. Okay, so right after the collapse of Savage's Standard Hives. Now, William was again bedridden. He started the same practice. He would not move out of his bed, but Charlotte would always be by his side. Okay, so Charlotte would come to him. She would sit by the side of her father. She was such a dedicated daughter, such a loving daughter, and Charlotte would read out books to William. William was not at all interested. He has often asked Charlotte to stop doing that, but Charlotte would not concede. Okay, because she couldn't accept the fact that her father has accepted defeat. So, with the hope that she will be able to revive her father one more time, again with the hope that she will one day get her father back again, Charlotte would spend any number of hours by the side of her father reading out books to him. Now, what happened was that one day William died. Okay, it is not mentioned in the novel, but one day William died. Uh, and again, Matilda was the one who had to suffer everything. She had to look after the affairs of the entire family. And it is mentioned that Matilda has successfully married off her daughters. Okay, except Charlotte. Charlotte was not married, but Matilda, maybe she took the responsibility upon herself along with her mother. They married the rest of her siblings, or Matilda married off her other daughters. And what happened to Edmund is that Edmund disappeared. Okay, okay. One day Edmund disappeared, and it is described that he disappeared into the gutters of London. Okay, so nothing is known about Edmund. So he was uh, an alcoholic. So he was a wayward son. Okay, he was a wayward son who lost his way, and one day he disappeared into the gutters of London. Now, what happened was that you know that Edmund made love with Alberta the maid, and Alberta became pregnant. Okay, Alberta became pregnant, and she gave birth to Edmund's child. Okay, she gave birth to Edmund's child, and upon giving birth, Alberta died. And when Alberta died, the responsibility of looking after the child was entrusted upon the family of Edmund, because it was Edmund who was responsible for making the poor girl pregnant, and the responsibility of looking after the child came upon the head of William's family. And William comes to know about this one day when he heard the sound of an infant crying. Okay, it happened when Charlotte, as usual, it happened when Charlotte was reading a book to William. While she was reading, uh, the sound of a baby's cry was heard from downstairs, and Charlotte immediately stopped reading and she started running down. When she started running down, William asked Charlotte who the baby was, and it is then Charlotte informs that it is none other than Edmund's child. And that is where the story of William comes to an end. But still, there is one more thing that you have to know. After the death of her father, after her sisters have all been married off, Charlotte traveled with this baby, this child, to USA. Okay, she came to USA with a child, and in USA nobody knew who the child was. Okay, anyway, it was Edmund's child. So Charlotte came to USA, and in USA Charlotte became a teacher, and she also became a headmistress. She was a very successful scholar. Okay, so William's hopes, William's dream was fulfilled through Charlotte. So she carried the tradition of William forward. She was a scholar, she became a teacher and a headmistress there, and she brought the child up. And it is this child who was the great great grandfather of George. So you come to know that George actually um, he hails from the family of William. Okay, so these two families are connected. So uh, uh, George mentions Charlotte as the first lady of their family. Okay, the first lady, she came with a child, and this child was George's great 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 grandfather. Okay, so again, Charlotte was his great 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 grandmother. Now, so you have to know that George's full name is George Savage, and Tom's full name is Thomas Savage. Okay, these are important points. George is George Savage, and Tom is Thomas Savage. And after returning to the farm, after the death of his father George, okay, so one day George died, and after the death of George, Tom wrote a book called The History of Bees, and this book is written in 2040s. Okay, he wrote a book. He I think it was exactly in 2045. I think Thomas Savage published this book called The History of Bees. Now, I have already told that when Tao was there in Beijing looking for the whereabouts of her son Wavon, she visited a library, and from that library, she got this book called The History of Bees, written by Thomas Savage. And it is this book that she eventually gives to Lichiera, the leader of the committee, and it is this book that inspires both Tao and Lichiera to preserve the bees that have returned. Okay, so you are already informed that by 2098, the bees that disappeared way back in 2020s during the time of George. So the disappearance, the colony collapse disorder took place in 2020s, and the bees disappeared. And this phenomenon happened not only in USA, it happened elsewhere in Europe, and it also happened in Asian countries like China. So it was a global phenomenon, and that is why it was uh, designated using the name colony collapse disorder, which was a global phenomenon. And the bees disappeared completely by 2030s, and it is then they reappear in 2098. And it is the history of bees written by Thomas Savage, son of George, which informs Tao and Lichiera to look after the bees in a better way. Okay, so this is how uh, Maya Lunde connects the three stories. It is actually a beautiful nexus. It is actually a very beautiful book, and I advise all of my students to go through the book once you get the time. Okay. Anyhow, I hope that this particular lecture would help you. If you have got any questions, you can get back to me through the comments. Okay. Thank you so much.